everyone. Welcome back to the Kirkpatrick podcast. It is Vanessa, and I am very excited to be chatting with you all today about something that a lot of organizations say they want to be, but yet they don't know exactly how to get there. So most organizations say things like they want to be more innovative, more agile, more growth focused. And when they talk about how to get there, all you hear about is, tools and ideas and strategies and new, and moving faster, faster, faster. But here's where things get kind of interesting. Very few organizations actually talk about how they know what's actually working. See, what they do is they continue to layer on new, because there's this assumption that there are things that aren't working because, they heard it from a friend. They maybe concede things aren't working, or they just have this gut feeling that things aren't working, or maybe they get into a new position and they want to put their stamp on the position from their predecessor. Organizations, they don't struggle with generating ideas. They struggle to actually understand which ideas are the ones that create results. And that's why so many organizations think that they're innovating, but they're really just experimenting without learning. So most organizations think that innovation and growth come from more activities, more experimentation, more output, more. So many organizations, I can say it for myself, I wanted to change. I want to grow KP. I want to innovate. And I had a real hard lesson very recently. I needed to stop doing more and figure out exactly what was working and what wasn't. And I needed to start listening more than speaking more. And what myself and a lot of organizations are missing is a system for understanding impact and what drives results. And see, when organizations start running multiple initiatives, they invest so much, and investing isn't just necessarily the financial resources. It's the time, the people that are needed for the new initiatives. It's not even just the people needed to create the initiatives. It's the mind space and the mind share that's now taken up for those that are recipients of this new initiative or innovation, right? It's a lot of change being thrown at us at one time, and we start to get change fatigue. We all know it. We all feel it. And what we see is, organizations just throwing more and more and more without stopping and realizing they need to actually understand how to identify what's working and to do maybe a little bit less and streamline. We talk about vanity metrics. We talk about, training evaluation, right? That same concept applies to programs or initiatives for an organization. See, when we launch an initiative, there might be some metrics to measure success. However, those metrics may only be reporting activity. We did this on this day. We actually, think of it this way, right? There's a new system launched in an organization, and you finally get to the rollout date, and everyone thinks like, well, done. And what they don't think about is they actually have to continue to measure adoption and impact and performance improvement. If we don't report the right activities, if we don't measure beyond, did the initiative launch? we'll never be able to answer things like what should be scaled or what should stop or what worked and what didn't. The evaluation is what will give us truly that ability to be strategic, to be visionary, to be innovative. And innovation without evaluation is just motion. More organizations do quite a few things wrong, but let's break down a couple of the biggest misconceptions. First things first, we always want to go faster. Organizations and executives, they prioritize speed over understanding. It's kind of why I personally have a love-hate relationship with the agile process. I get it. I love that it's iterative. I love that we can stop, but it also kind of perpetuates this conception that we have to be doing more. We have to be moving faster. We have to, keep going and pushing. And, organizations start to feel this pressure to launch quickly. I can think of, many times where I've put pressure on my team or I've put pressure on, you know, developers that I've been working with, like when we're developing Caddy, to launch quicker, to move faster. See, the problem with a move fast mindset is that we never actually close the loop. There's no reflection, there's no understanding. We just go in a straight line, as opposed to constantly having this feedback loop to understand what worked and what didn't. And speed without understanding creates more problems faster. It's so hard to ensure that we thought about things from all angles, and it's more likely that we will repeat a mistake because we didn't stop to understand. We didn't hear from others to get their take on how the program ran or how the initiative ran. We didn't stop to think about the impact on another area of the business and who should have been consulted. Or if we had done this first, then this would have maybe even sped things up, or it could have gone smoother. The second misconception most organizations have is they scale before they understand. When something starts to look promising, they begin to scale it. The problem is when you don't have validated impact. So when you report on things like vanity metrics, right? And things like butts in seats or smiley sheets or NPS scores, these vanity metrics tell this false narrative, this false story that this thing is good, this looks good. There's some indicators here that's showing we should go ahead and start to scale. And we rush to scale something. But what starts to happen is that we scale ineffective solutions. So we didn't give time for, I don't know why it's popping into my head, but like the sourdough to bake. But we didn't give time for, the idea to bake all the way through, right? We did not give enough time to understand, would this actually work in context? Think of it in the context of leadership development programs. A lot of them seem great on paper. They get really great scores. People feel really great after the fact. They probably had a really great experience with the facilitator, with the team that they were with the cohort, the activities. They maybe learned a lot about themselves and where they want to go and where they want to be. But then it never transfers to behavior. Now, if you bring in a leadership program and you just start to run leaders through it because the NPS score was good, people seemed happier, you could generally get a sense of maybe a little bit of a confidence lift afterwards. You can see that there was something that changed. Then you start to scale an ineffective leadership development program. And frankly, that's what I think most of our leadership development programs are. Ineffective. And for some of them, it's probably the content. But for most, it's because they don't have the organizational context embedded. They don't, there's issues within the organization that need to be addressed in the performance environment. We don't stop and look at those things. And so what starts to happen is you scale the leadership development program that is not building your talent pipeline. And we have to stop scaling before we understand. Another misconception most organizations have is they confuse data with insight. We see this all the time, and I am sorry, but Power BI, I don't know how to use you, but love you. You are great. You do great work. And you've created this problem where there are dashboards everywhere. And also, all of our systems come with some sort of data analytics and dashboard. So now we're looking at those, data and dashboards and reports and metrics. They're literally everywhere. They're coming out of our ears. But all we have is data. It's still up to us to interpret it. There's actually no insight behind the data. This is the fail so often with relying solely on quantitative data. The amount of people who leverage the Kirkpatrick model and tell me that they only really do surveys because they rely on quantitative data truly are missing so much powerful data to tell them what's working and what's not and why. And the problem with more data is that there's no interpretation and there's no actual alignment on that data. I was facilitating a program, or I was doing something recently. I was facilitating at a conference, and we were talking about how to use AI with evaluation. And I was talking about rubrics. And so I asked, after the session, an aha, and someone said, I want to use AI to develop the standard rubric to evaluate our facilitators. Because right now, what we're having is everyone's just kind of going in and evaluating facilitators based on their own view and their own kind of internal rubric. And I was so excited to hear that because that's exactly how you get dirty data. When you don't provide that standardized rubric or you align on good, better, best, right? Not so good. Then everyone's starting to use their own interpretation. It becomes subjective. So what's good for Sally over here, maybe not so good with me, because we have this ability to be subjective. We're not aligned. And so it just creates this pool of dirty data. It creates false narratives. I saw it happen when I volunteered for an organization where we had to evaluate our, alumni groups. And for the longest time, the person that was evaluating had to give them, I think it was like red, yellow, green at the time, a red, yellow, green, how they were doing. And we just kind of had to feel, whatever you feel. You think, red of this, yellow of this, green of that. The goal was to make it easy because we're all volunteers, right? The problem was someone like me, I'm kind of a strict evaluator. And others felt like the evaluation was reflective of them and their role as a supervisory volunteer, that they were doing something wrong because their groups weren't doing great. And they weren't all, green with some yellows. And for others, they were too lenient. And so it created this problem where we had groups that were struggling and we didn't know. We couldn't provide them with the help that they needed or wanted. And they truly wanted the help. But from a higher level, we couldn't see what they needed because everything on paper looked good because of the bias of the evaluator. And then there were some that needed some additional support, or didn't need some additional support, but maybe I didn't give them as much a benefit as they could have had. I'm kind of a strict evaluator. Sorry about that. Now, the key with data and having so much of it, it actually isn't good. When you have data, it does not necessarily mean that you have clarity. And then finally, the biggest misconceptions organizations make is that they treat evaluation as a step and not a system. When evaluation happens solely at the end of a process, you miss so much opportunity to course correct, to innovate, to grow, and to find out what can scale. You become disconnected from the decisions that need to be made and that should be made. Evaluation is not a check the box activity. It is the way that you will know what's working and what's not, and it's going to give you insight in real time. But if evaluation is something you only do after the fact, it's never going to drive performance and will never drive innovation, growth, or scale. And organizations that actually innovate well, they don't just generate better ideas. They don't just generate ideas. What they do is they understand impact better. What they do differently is they define success up front. What should change? How will we know? They figure out what their North Star is for this initiative. They build in feedback loops. They listen to their employees, to their customers. They look at all sorts of analytics to better understand what's working and why. They have continuous data, but they also have continuous adjustment. They connect decisions to data. Data is not just about creating an after action report or some executive summary. It becomes decision making. And that's when evaluation becomes not just about measurement, but about creating clarity. And this is where the Kirkpatrick model becomes more than a framework. It provides a shared language, structure for thinking, connection between learning and readiness, to behavior and performance, and to results and return. It has years of backing behind organizations that have leveraged it to success. And so many people that have leveraged it outside of just training because of its flexible simplicity. The model aligns thinking, but scaling requires embedding that thinking across the organization. And the reality is, in organizations that are, with multiple teams, multiple priorities, multiple definitions of success, when you don't have alignment, you have fragmentation. And that's where those silos continue to just build stronger. I hear a lot, how do I scale Kirkpatrick? How do I scale evaluation? And they want to put people just in a certification program. And that's not how you scale. You don't scale Kirkpatrick just through teaching the model. You have to embed it as a way of thinking across the enterprise. Those organizations that run at peak performance, they're constantly innovating and growing. What they eventually realize is evaluation and learning and data collection, all of that, this can't live on one team. It can't depend on individuals alone. There is no Superman or Superwoman. It requires consistency. It requires governance. It requires standards. It requires ownership. It requires everyone being on board with this. And if you want to scale performance, you need to scale how your organization thinks about performance. And this is where evaluation becomes a capability and not an activity. Innovation doesn't come from more ideas. Growth doesn't come from more activity. Scaling doesn't come from doing more faster. They all come from understanding what works and building on it. And that's exactly what this work, the book, Building a Culture of Evaluation, is all about. It's about helping organizations move from measuring activity to understanding performance to unlock innovation, growth, scale. In a time in which everything feels like it's changing, from the technology that we use, who we hire, why we hire, if we hire, the global economy, the global stage feels like it's changing, the workforce is changing. We have to stop and understand what actually is working and what won't, so we are ready for the future. Because when you understand what works, everything else becomes easier to scale. If you want to know where your organization stands with embedding evaluation throughout your organization, we've got a learning maturity assessment for you. It'll be down in the show notes or in the bottom of the YouTube video, so you can better understand where your organization lies to have a conversation with your team. And you also are invited to a 30-minute call with my team to a 90-day roadmap to help you get to the next step in your maturity and scale evaluation. Friends, thank you so much for this episode, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye.